The twin suns of Orath burned high in the violet sky, turning the jagged plains into waves of molten gold and shadow. The air shimmered with heat and the cries of carrion birds that circled lazily above the battlefield. The skirmish had ended only an hour ago. What was left behind were shattered weapons, the scent of burned ozone, and the wounded, both predator and prey alike. Sergeant Kara Holt of the Terran Vanguard moved carefully through the field, her exosuit hissing softly as it compensated for Orath's heavy gravity. Her visor fed her readings in a dull green hue. Life signs, temperature spikes, traces of movement. She wasn't looking for enemies this time. She was looking for survivors. Behind her trudged a towering creature of fur and fang, Captain Var'ka of the Sharkai Prideborn, one of the planet's dominant species. His kind were a blend of feline grace and predatory brutality, standing taller than a man with shoulders wide enough to carry a small vehicle. He was a commander among his people, a veteran of countless hunts and wars. Today, however, even he moved with a strange caution. "You humans," Var'ka rumbled in his deep, guttural voice, his amber eyes flicking toward Kara. "You search for wounded, even the weak ones." Kara didn't look up from her scanner. "We don't leave anyone behind. Even the weak deserve a chance." The alien made a sound between a snarl and a chuckle. "Weakness invites death. Nature does not pity." "Maybe," she replied. "But we aren't nature." They continued through the wreckage in silence, the only sound the distant howl of the wind as it blew across the endless plains. The battle had been sudden. The Sharkai had been ambushed by a rival predator clan, the Drath'en. Humans had intervened as allies, bound by treaty and shared interest in the mineral-rich world. Kara crouched beside a mangled transport, her sensors pinging faintly. A weak life sign. She pried open a panel and found a small figure huddled inside. It was a Sharkai cub, no older than 10 human years, its fur matted with blood and dust. One of its legs was pinned under twisted metal. It whimpered softly as she approached, baring its tiny fangs in defiance. "Easy," she said gently, switching to the Sharkai dialect. "I'm here to help." The cub blinked in surprise. It had not expected the soft-voiced off-worlder to speak its tongue. Kara lifted the wreckage with a grunt, her exosuit straining under the weight until the cub was free. She pulled a medkit from her pack and began spraying nanogel onto the wound. The substance hissed and sealed the torn flesh. Var'ka watched from a distance, his tail flicking. "You waste your time. It is injured. It will not hunt again." Kara shot him a look. "Then it will live another way. You said this was one of your pack." He hesitated before replying. "It was." She caught the word "was," not "is." In Sharkai culture, a wounded cub unable to hunt was considered already lost. Burden. A shadow on the pride. When the cub stirred and whimpered again, Kara smiled behind her visor. "You'll be fine, little one. You're strong." The cub stared at her, its predator's gaze mixed with something else now. Curiosity. But before Kara could finish, her comms crackled with static. "Command to all units. Contact lost with forward patrol. Coordinates 2 clicks north. Possible Drath'en survivors." Kara stood, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. "We need to move." Var'ka sniffed the air. "I smell them. Drath'en. Fresh scent." They began moving north, Kara leading the cub behind her as they traversed the scorched plain. The suns were sinking now, turning the landscape a deep crimson. Shadows grew long. Every sound felt sharper, closer. As they approached a ridge overlooking a shallow ravine, Var'ka froze. His ears twitched. "They are close." Kara adjusted her visor. thermal signatures appeared, a dozen, maybe more, moving in formation. Drath'en scavengers, still armed and restless after the battle. "Stay low," she whispered to the cub. "Don't move." The shark eye captain unsheathed his claws, their edges gleaming like knives. "Let us strike first." But before they could act, one of the Drath'en noticed movement. A roar echoed through the ravine, deep, guttural, like rolling thunder. Then came the charge. Gunfire and plasma bolts erupted, scorching the air. Kara dropped to one knee, firing precise bursts from her pulse rifle, cutting through the first attackers. Var'ka leaped into the fray with a savage roar, claws tearing through armor and flesh alike. The ground shook with the force of his strikes. Kara moved to flank them, her suit's targeting system locking onto enemies with cold precision. The Drath'en were fast, but not fast enough. Within minutes, half their number lay fallen. But victory came at a cost. One of the Drath'en snipers hidden in the rocks above fired, a bright pulse of energy that sliced through the air. Kara turned just in time to see the bolt hit the cub. The scream that followed was not the sound of an animal. It was pain raw enough to shake the air. The cub fell, clutching its side, blood steaming against the cold dirt. Everything froze. Var'ka's snarl died in his throat. The Drath'en hesitated, even they seemed startled. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. Kara dropped her weapon and sprinted forward, sliding beside the cub. Her hands moved fast, pressing the medgel to the wound, sealing it as best she could. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Stay with me, little one." The cub's breaths came in ragged gasps. Its small claws dug into the dirt, eyes wide with terror. Something inside Kara snapped. The part of her trained to stay calm, to follow procedure, it broke. She stood slowly, turning toward the ridge where the sniper had fired from. The Drath'en marksman aimed again. And Kara roared. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even a sound meant for communication. It was pure rage, the kind that made blood boil and hearts seize. The sound echoed across the battlefield like a living force. Even Var'ka, hardened killer of 100 hunts, felt his fur bristle. The Drath'en froze. One stumbled backward, eyes wide. Kara charged uphill, every step pounding like thunder. She didn't fire. She didn't need to. When she reached the sniper, she slammed into him with such force that his armor cracked. Her gauntlet ripped the weapon from his hand, and she drove it into the dirt beside his head. "You shot a child," she growled, voice trembling with fury. "A cub," the Drath'en snarled. "Weak prey deserves." He never finished. Her fist silenced him with one devastating strike. When she turned back, the other Drath'en had already dropped their weapons. Even they, predators by birth, killers by culture, knew that what had awakened in the human was something older, darker, and infinitely more dangerous than hunger. Var'ka stood among the bodies, staring. The human's roar still echoed in his skull. He had hunted beasts the size of starships. He had faced death countless times. But never, had he heard a sound that made his instincts scream run. He looked at the cub, who was breathing weakly now but alive. The human knelt again, her hands trembling as she worked to stabilize it. For a long time, the shark eye captain said nothing. Then slowly he lowered his head, a gesture of respect among his kind. "You fight for one that is not of your blood," he said quietly. "Why?" Kara didn't look up. "Because pain like that, no one deserves it. Not even the smallest among you." Var'ka's gaze drifted toward the fallen Drath'en. "Your kind are strange. You pity the weak. And yet your fury could shatter mountains." Kara gave a bitter smile. Maybe that's why we survive. Night began to fall over Orath, the two suns sinking behind the horizon. The plain grew dark, the sky filling with glittering stars. Var'ka watched her lift the cub gently and carry it toward their base. He had thought of humans as fragile, soft things, clever yes, but harmless beyond their weapons. Yet in that moment, he understood what the others in the galaxy whispered about them. Humans were not predators because of their fangs or claws. They were predators because they chose to protect what others would abandon. Because when one of their own screamed in pain, or even someone else's young, they would roar loud enough to silence the stars. And for the first time in his long life, Captain Var'ka felt something unfamiliar creep through his heart. Not fear. Respect. The night on Orath was unlike any other world Sergeant Kara Holt had served on. The twin moons cast long silver arcs across the plains, glinting off scorched armor and broken weapons. The air smelled of ozone and blood. In the silence that followed the battle, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic breathing of the HFY Cub resting inside the medical shelter. Kara sat beside the medbed, removing her helmet and letting the cool air hit her face. Her short brown hair was matted with dust, her cheeks streaked with grime and tears. She hadn't cried in years, not since Titan Station. But hearing that cub scream had torn something open inside her, something buried deep beneath layers of military discipline. Outside the shelter, Var'ka stood watching the stars. The great predator's silhouette was motionless, his mane rippling in the wind. For hours he had said nothing. But Kara knew he was thinking. She had seen that same stillness in soldiers after battles, the quiet before realization set in. When he finally entered the shelter, his heavy footsteps were barely audible. He glanced at the cub, whose breathing had steadied under the hum of the medkit. Then he looked at Kara. "The healer drone says it will live," he said softly. "The wound was deep, but the flesh mends." Kara nodded without looking up. "Good. It deserves that chance." Var'ka tilted his head. "You speak of it as though it were one of your own." She gave a small laugh, tired but sincere. "Maybe it is now." The alien's golden eyes narrowed slightly. Among the HFY, when a cub bleeds in battle and survives, it earns its mark. But when it is saved by another, the debt passes to the pride. He paused. "You have saved more than a life, human. You have bound yourself to us by honor." Kara finally met his gaze. "Then I hope your kind keep their promises." He stepped closer, lowering his massive head until his eyes were level with hers. "You misunderstand. It is we who must prove worthy of yours." For a moment they held each other's gaze. Predator and human, two species born from entirely different worlds, united by something beyond words. But peace, as always, was fragile. A sharp chirp echoed from Kara's communicator. "Vanguard command to Sergeant Holt. Enemy reinforcements inbound. Estimated arrival, 2 hours. Prepare for immediate evacuation." She cursed under her breath. Of course. The Drath'en never stop. Var'ka bared his fangs. "They will come for revenge. You killed their hunters. You shamed their pride." Kara stood, checking her rifle's charge. "Then we make sure they regret it." She turned to the cub, who was awake now, weak but alert. Its wide amber eyes followed her movements. "Stay down," she said softly. "We'll protect you." The cub tried to speak, its voice a broken whisper. "Human, why?" Kara knelt beside it. "Because someone has to." It blinked slowly, confusion fading into understanding. When the attack came, it came fast. The Drath'en descended from the ridges like a storm, their plasma rifles cutting through the night with bright streaks of energy. Explosions tore across the plain. Kara and Var'ka's mixed unit, a handful of humans and Shark-Eye warriors, dug in among the rocks, returning fire with everything they had. Kara's rifle burned hot in her hands. She moved like she had on Earth's worst battlefields. Fast, efficient, unrelenting. But the enemy kept coming. For every Drath'en that fell, 2 more appeared. Var'ka fought like a beast unleashed, claws tearing through armor, his roars shaking the air. But even he began to tire. Plasma burns marred his fur, and blood dripped from a gash across his chest. "Kara!" he shouted above the chaos. "They will overrun us." She ducked behind cover, checking her ammo, nearly spent. Not yet. Not while that cub's still breathing. And then she saw it. The Drath'en commander towering above his troops. His armor painted in blood-red streaks. He was advancing directly toward the shelter. Kara didn't think. Ran. She tore across the open ground, ignoring the plasma fire slicing past her. Her shield flickered, alarms screamed in her helmet, but she kept moving. She slammed into the commander before he could reach the medbay, both of them tumbling into the dirt. He was strong, stronger than she expected. His claws slashed at her armor, scoring deep gouges. She blocked one strike, then another, her breath coming in ragged bursts. "You protect the weak," he snarled, forcing her down. "You disgrace the hunt." Kara spat blood and shoved her knee into his chest, twisting to grab her sidearm. "Then call me a disgrace." She fired point blank. The plasma bolt punched through his neck, vaporizing half of his helm. The commander fell, twitching before going still. When she looked up, the battlefield had gone eerily quiet. The Drath'en were retreating. Their leader was dead, and the pack, like all predators without an alpha, broke apart in confusion and fear. Var'ka stood amid the wreckage, bloodied but alive. Around him, the remaining Shark-Eye warriors howled in victory. Kara stumbled toward the shelter, collapsing against the doorway. The cub was still there, wide-eyed, watching her. She smiled weakly. "Told you we'd protect you." The cub crawled closer, reaching out a trembling hand to touch her gauntlet. "You roar louder than any hunter." She laughed, a soft, breathless sound. "Guess we humans do that sometimes." Var'ka entered, his armor dented and claws cracked, but his expression held something new. Pride and maybe a hint of reverence. "The pack is yours, human. You have earned the right." Kara looked at him, confused. "I don't need your pack, Captain." He shook his massive head. "It is not a gift. It is truth. From this day, when the Shark-Eye speak of the hunt that burned the plains, they will remember the roar that silenced predators. They will remember that a human fought not for conquest, but for a cub. That is strength beyond nature." The words hung in the air like a promise. Weeks later, when the war finally ended, the Shark-Eye Prideborn built a monument on that same plain. A tall obsidian spire etched with runes in both human and Shark-Eye script. At its base were 2 figures carved in stone, a great predator standing beside a human soldier, and between them, a small cub looking toward the stars. The inscription read, "When the cub cried, a human roared." And the galaxy listened. Kara never returned to Orath after the treaty was signed. But stories of the battle spread far beyond the system. Among soldiers, traders, and wanderers, it became something more than a tale of war. It became a story of what humanity truly was. Not conquerors, not saviors, but protectors who could fight like demons when the innocent suffered. And on nights when the twin moons of Orath rose high, the Shark-Eye elders would still tell their cubs the same legend. Of the day a predator's child screamed in pain, and a human roared loud enough to make the stars fall silent. The end.